Hello viewers, and a warm welcome to the show this evening. My name is Chef Andy, welcoming you to Dinner Guide. And on this next episode, we're going to be focusing on something very simple, something that most of you may have already maybe enjoyed or indulged in maybe on your night out. But on this particular episode, I'm going to be trying to bring a very simple touch to it using some very locally sourced ingredients. And I'm also going to be making some very simple variations to this simple recipe that I'll of course update you at the end of this episode. Now before I begin, I will of course introduce the dish for today, which is a very simple buttermilk chicken Caesar salad. And for that you will require the ingredients that I'm about to begin to introduce. So for those of you who are taking some notes for this recipe, then this is your chance to grab your pens and papers. Now for this recipe you will require about 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise. You'll also require about 4 cloves of garlic. You'll also require about 1 tablespoon of some grated Parmesan cheese. You'll also require about 100 grams of some chicken breast, a few cherry tomatoes which you'll use for garnishing, a bit of some lemon, or rather a whole imported lemon. You can of course substitute this for a local variety. You'll also require about 3/4 cup of buttermilk, about 2 sesame buns or any particular bread that you may be able to toast and incorporate into your salad. You'll also require some lettuce, some salt and pepper for seasoning, and last but not least, some oil that you'll use to cook with. But before we begin, we'll give you this chance to sit back, relax and unwind, and we'll catch you after a short break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in, we're right about ready to start the dish for today, which is a very simple buttermilk chicken Caesar salad. Now very often some of us miss out on the very beautiful options that you can actually incorporate into a dinner service or even a dinner evening at home. And one particular one that you can be able to do with a very simple ease, especially for those of you who are of course looking at cutting out your carbs but maintaining your protein diet. This is of course also a very good alternative. I will of course also mention there could be some allergens to this dish, especially if you're not a common favorite with cheese. So you can of course be able to omit the cheese from this recipe, and you can still be able to come up with a very simple and beautiful salad likewise. Now before we begin, very simply, we're going to start by making our marination. But this particular marination will work 2 ways. We're of course going to use it both as a dressing and of course for the marination of the chicken. So to begin the process, begin by adding your buttermilk into a bowl. Now for some of you who may not be well informed, buttermilk is of course known by the local term maziwa lala. Now buttermilk is, as I mentioned, is also a very good addition to any particular meat marinade. So it's also a very good addition, especially if you're trying to tenderize such cuts as lamb or even goat or even beef. Now next ingredient to go into this will be our garlic. But I will of course mention 2 different ways that you can incorporate your garlic. You can of course be able to use this very simple tool, which is a garlic press. And you're also not limited to use a pestle and mortar. If you of course also have one of those in your kitchen, do feel free to work with those as well. So all we're going to do is begin by pressing our garlic. Now the beautiful thing with this small device is it actually manages to give you a very beautiful consistency of the garlic, gives you a very good mince to it. And another thing, it also saves you quite the effort of having to chop it up finely or of course use your pestle and mortar. This of course I will also recommend on many occasions. You can also use it for mincing very small quantities of garlic. But of course if you're talking about a whole clove of garlic or maybe up to a kilo of garlic, you can of course use a pestle and mortar. It will of course save you time and effort. Right, so once your garlic is in, we're also going to add our lemon. So very simple technique. Before you slice your lemon, begin by rolling it on the surface of your board. Remember, this actually allows for you to extract the juices. And after pressing for about 30 seconds, proceed to slice into half and proceed to squeeze your lemon juice into your buttermilk mixture. We will of course be using half a lemon for this recipe, and you can of course always reserve the rest or proceed to add the rest of your lemon if of course you're really looking for a very zesty flavor. Right, so once your lemon is in, proceed to discard. And now next up, very simply, always remember to season any of your ingredients that you'll be marinating with. So we're going to proceed to add about a teaspoon of salt, and of course, just to give it a bit of a kick, proceed to crush over a bit of some black peppercorns and proceed to mix through. Making sure of course to go around your bowl for about 1 or 2 minutes. And once mixed through, very simply, very important to remember at this stage, you will of course be using the same mixture for your dressing. So you can of course proceed to grab a small bowl or even a small dish, and very quickly proceed to portion out about 5 to 6 tablespoons of your mixture. And of course, depending on how much of this salad you're going to be making, very important to mention, if you're going to be making bigger quantities, you can of course adjust your portion. Remember, this particular mixture works 2 ways: as a dressing and as a salad dressing of course, and as a marination. So be very sure to make sure that if you're going to be making some of this mixture, do take your time to split the mixture into 2 portions. That way you may actually be able to avoid making the mistake that I occasionally make once in a while, which is of course throwing the chicken in too quickly and forgetting about the dressing. Now, next process, we're going to proceed to marinate our chicken. So I'm just going to grab some serviettes, and I'm going to proceed to move my piece of chicken onto the sheets, and I'm pretty much just using this to clear out any traces of liquid that could be on the chicken. Remember, a bit of liquid can actually cause quite a bit of harm. It actually also carries a bit of bacteria, so be sure to always try and reduce any bits of water that are in your meat container by using such techniques. Or you can of course just dump it up also with a piece of cloth that you can be able to rewash. But of course, be very vigilant to make sure that if you're going to be using a cloth, that it's not actually going to carry the contaminants right through, and you actually reserve it just for the process of making or of patting down your meat. Right, so in goes your chicken into the mixture. Proceed to toss that in there. And all you need to do now is proceed to allow this to continue to marinate for anywhere between half a day or even overnight. So I'm going to basically proceed to cover this up. And what we're going to do is we are going to come back and use a different portion that I'd actually reserved for this recipe. And this is basically just going to sit back, and it was basically for the purpose of also just giving you the idea of how it's done. So very simply, once covered, proceed to allow that to marinate in your refrigerator. So you can leave this up to overnight, and if you're going to be making it for dinner, maybe you can actually marinate this early in the morning and proceed to cook it maybe a few minutes closer to the time you'll be serving it. So I'm just going to move this from the counter very quickly. And of course, this will give us just a bit of time to proceed to prepare the rest of our ingredients. So very importantly, always make sure not to contaminate or carry your contaminants right through. One particular beautiful technique to use is by turning over your board. This will of course give you a nice cleaner area to work with, and it will of course make sure that you're not of course going to also contaminate the rest of your ingredients. Now we're going to begin the process of making croutons. So it's a very simple technique. Now begin by heating up some oil in a pot. You can of course also coat your bread in a bit of oil and proceed to cook that in the oven. But because of the fact that this is also a much quicker way and a more efficient way, and it is of course also very, very handy to use different techniques, and some of you may of course not have ovens to use at home, but you can still of course come up with a very, very simple Caesar salad. You can of course heat up some oil in a pot, and basically what you're going to do now is any particular bread that you may have available to you. Doesn't really matter if it's actually white or brown bread, the preference is yours. You're basically going to begin the process by chopping up your bread into some sizable chunks. So if you're going to be using a bun, you can proceed to slice that into 4 pieces. And all you need to do at this stage is proceed to just press them very, very lightly by hand. Of course, this is to make sure that they're actually going to absorb the oil and they're actually going to puff up very, very nicely. So just proceed to squeeze that by hand, as of course you give your oil a bit of time to come to the boil. And once that's done, you can proceed to repeat the same process for your second piece. Once more, slicing into quarters, and you can also press that down on your board. It will of course also save you the effort. And proceed to do the same thing for your last and final piece. Of course, once more, squeezing very firmly on your board. And this will of course now allow for you to prepare also the rest of your other ingredients. So very, very simply, we're also going to be adding some of the Parmesan into the marination. As I said, you can of course add your Parmesan in the marination, or you can of course just use it to garnish your salad. It really won't make much of a difference. Now of course I'm also going to be chopping up some tomatoes just for garnish, of course. Remember, this is not a particular star ingredient on a Caesar salad. Very simply, I'm going to slice about 4 or 5 pieces of cherry tomato. You can of course also incorporate whole tomatoes if these are not available to you. Right, so your tomatoes are done. I'm going to just reserve the rest. Next up, your lettuce. So the original lettuce that we'd normally use for this recipe would be romaine lettuce, but as I mentioned, most of these ingredients may not be available to us all. So I'm going to be substituting this with some soft leaf lettuce. This is of course very, very easy to find in most local markets. And you can of course be able to alternate this with many other types of lettuce, depending of course on the availability to you and of course the cost factor. Now very, very simply, you can begin by slicing or just carving out that bit of heart from your lettuce pieces by using a sharp knife. And you can just reserve 1 piece and you can work with about half. So using half of this should actually give you about a nice beautiful portion for about 1 full adult, and can also make also about two sizable portions as a side salad for 2. Right, so very simply chop that into some nice sizable chunks, and you can of course proceed to add that to the bowl that you'll be tossing it in the dressing with. And this you can actually be able to leave on the counter for just a few minutes, just giving you enough time to work on your bread. So very simply begin by dropping 1 piece just to make sure that your oil is hot enough. Very important also, always have some kitchen towel or some serviettes available just to be able to drain your bread very, very quickly. And as I said, in some hot oil, this should be very, very rapid. So this definitely needs your attention right from the start to the finish. And all you need to do is toss those in your hot oil for anywhere between half a minute for each piece. Tossing them continuously also ensures that you get a more even color. And just proceed to do the same right up until you get to the last and final piece. And as I mentioned, for some of you who may of course have ovens at home, you can of course also coat this in a bit of some oil. Proceed to throw them in the oven and they will of course brown just the same. But one thing I like about using the frying technique, it actually makes the bread very, very tasty It actually brings the maillard effect to action, and it also makes a very, very beautiful addition of some sweetness to your bread. Similar to what you get, especially for those of you who are very, very big fans of having toast in the morning. Right, now just to finish off our last few pieces. Right, once those are done, all you need to do is proceed to spread them out on your parchment paper or some serviettes. That should allow for them to drain very, very gently and undisturbed. Also gives a bit of time for them to cool off. So very, very important, if you're going to be taking this off the fire, be sure to lay them maybe on a flat surface or on a plate. This is of course also going to aid that they actually cool a little faster and that they're actually not going to still be warm once they go into your salad. Right, just to take off those last few pieces. Right, so as I mentioned, very, very simple tips to begin your salad. So at this stage, you pretty much have most of your ingredients ready to go. But very, very importantly, before we take the break, I'm also going to take you through the process of cooking your chicken. So I'm just going to take out a different chicken piece that we had marinated much earlier in the show. And all we are going to do is we're going to transfer this onto a baking tray. So for this, you'll of course need a baking sheet. Be sure to also have some aluminum foil there. Remember, this makes it very, very easy, especially when cleaning and reusing your baking tray. You can of course be able to lift this and discard it, and it makes it so much easier as opposed to scrubbing your baking sheet every single time. And all you need to do at this stage is drizzle just a bit of oil on the center. Be sure to only drizzle the bit of oil that you, or rather drizzle a bit of oil on the surface that you'll be using. This will of course make it also cost effective. And using a brush, this will of course give you a nice even layering. But of course, if you don't have one of those, you can also substitute that with a bit of some serviettes. You can just use a piece of serviette to just wipe a bit of oil on the surface. It will of course it won't make much of a difference. And now all we need to do is toss our chicken a few times in the marination. Allow the excess marination to run off your piece of chicken before proceeding to lay your piece of chicken flat on the most center point of your baking tray. And you can simply just crush over some black peppercorns and season once more with some salt before of course adding this to the oven. Now for the mixture, as I mentioned, remember, due to the fact that you have used raw meat for this particular recipe or for this particular process, you can of course be able to reuse this for any particular chicken pieces that you may be able to make on the same day. But remember, if you're going to be making this or using the same recipe in an alternative day, you will of course require to discard the mixture. So very, very important to also remind you at this point, if you're going to be making a very, very simple quantity or a very small quantity, be sure to also make a very, very small quantity of your Caesar mixture, because you also don't want to waste the rest of it. Now, all you need to do is slide that into a hot preheated oven. And we're basically going to cook that for about 20 minutes at about 180 degrees, just giving us enough time to clear up our station. But when we do come back, I will of course take you through the simple process of combining your salad, and I'm also going to be sharing some very, very simple and basic serving suggestions for this recipe. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in, we've pretty much finished the preparation of most of the ingredients for the dish of today, which is a very simple buttermilk Caesar chicken. And now we are going to finish off the plating part of it. Now we'll begin the process by taking out our chicken from the oven. Now this has of course had enough time to cool off and cook completely until doneness. So all we're going to do now is proceed to allow it to pretty much cool off very simply as we proceed to plate the rest of our ingredients. Now to begin the process, in a big bowl, or rather in any particular bowl you may have with some lettuce, begin by spreading out the leaves, breaking up the chunks, making sure that your leafy salad is actually also free of worms and of course free of any particular pieces or traces of sand. And once done, all you're going to do now is begin by adding about a teaspoon of some Parmesan cheese. Also add about a tablespoon of some mayonnaise. Now very important to remember to reserve some of the ingredients. Remember, you may of course proceed to combine your salad, and you may of course on certain occasions have very little of your ingredients remaining to finish. So very important to mention, I like to basically just combine in half amounts. This of course also makes sure that you can actually limit adding any excess to your mixture, and of course make sure that any particular ingredients that you added to your dish are pretty much of course also very handy and sufficient. Right, now to the same bowl I'm going to add about 3 tablespoons of my Caesar dressing. And now all you need to do is, by using a pair of tongs, proceed to toss your salad, making sure that your lettuce is evenly coated. Of course, always remember to also pull from the bottom, or rather scoop from the bottom, making sure that any particular dressing that is at the base is of course also incorporated into the dish. And all you need to do next is throw in a few pieces of your toasted sesame bun and proceed to toss that as well. Very important to also mention, there's nothing as worse, or there's nothing as bad as serving a very dry salad or a salad that's not well dressed. This is a very particular technique that we chefs prefer to use as well, and I also share the same tip with you. If you're going to be serving a salad, as opposed to having a very big bottle of dressing on the side, be sure to toss some of the dressing in the salad and basically serve any excess of your dressing on the side. This is of course for those of your guests or your diners who may be feeling like they want to add a little bit more. But the best way to serve a salad, always make sure to toss it in a bit of its vinaigrette or its dressing. And this will of course make sure that you can actually be able to encase the beautiful flavors that you're trying to present to your guests or to your diners at home. Right, now once that is done, we're going to begin to assemble our salad. But one particular tip I can also share with you, very simply, you can begin by adding about a tablespoon of your dressing into your bowl, and by using the back of your spoon you can pretty much just move the salad around the sides of your bowl or the plate of choice that you will be using. I particularly like to use a deeper style of a plate, because this will of course also enable for you to be able to scoop out the salad, and it also appeals when you plate. Alright, now the idea behind adding a bit of dressing on the plate as well, this is of course to also make sure that you also have a nice beautiful coating of flavor right to the last bite. And as I mentioned, also a very simple technique that you can use, especially for those of you who are not fans of serving your dressing on the side. You can also spread some of it on the plate, and this also makes it nice and easy for your diners to actually be able to clear up the plate with that little bit of salad that may be remaining. And all you need to do now is proceed to move your pieces of toast onto your plate. So you can of course choose any particular style of plating that you prefer. My preferred one is pretty much work with odd numbers, especially if it's ingredients that you can actually single out. So I'm going to start by placing about 5 pieces on the plate. Then very simply at the center of your plate, begin to build your salad by moving your lettuce onto the plate. Right, once done, proceed to assemble the rest of your ingredients. For the pieces of bread that you may have left over, you can pretty much add just maybe 2 or 3 pieces that are still plain to the side. And this, of course, always acts as a very, very good additional biting to the dish, so they can actually be able to bite onto those. And of course, it also incorporates a beautiful aspect of plating. Right, now next up, as I mentioned, tomatoes are not a very, very fond ingredient to add to a Caesar, but I'm going to be using them for some garnishing. This is basically just to give your plate a bit of color. So proceed to very randomly place individual pieces of some halved cherry tomatoes. And as I said, these are very, very good and handy, especially in a salad. They really, really bring a beautiful sweetness to the dish. And of course, also a very, very beautiful tip that I can share with you, especially when using tomatoes for a salad. Do proceed to season them right after slicing. This will of course also bring out the sweetness in the tomato, and it also incorporates a very, very beautiful general flavor to your salad. Right, now the last and final part, our chicken. So I'm going to move that from the baking tray, and all you need to do to this is proceed to slice that into some sizable chunks. Of course, remember, you do want your chicken to stand out on the salad, being that it is the protein or the main ingredient that you're trying to showcase. You can of course proceed to normally add those towards the very end, and you can simply proceed to just lay those right over the top of your salad. Simple as that. And just to finish that off, sprinkle with some grated Parmesan cheese. And because of course we do have a bit of our dressing that's still left over, very simply you can proceed to just drizzle that right over the top of your plate. Of course, also dripping some right over your pieces of chicken. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the last and final part of the dish for today. As I mentioned, very, very simple buttermilk chicken Caesar salad. And now for the very, very simple tips I was to share with you. Remember, you can of course omit some of the ingredients on this salad. For those of you who are not fans of cheese, you can of course be able to make the same dish very, very simply by omitting the cheese. And if you of course also a favorite of a different variety of cheese, do not be limited by the lingo and the menus out there that pretty much restrict you to being creative. Do take a chance and try the cheeses that are pretty much basic to your pantry, and ones that are also a favorite to you as well. You can of course also omit any addition of the bread. Of course, you can also serve the bread on the side, maybe with some unsalted butter or some herbed butter. And that of course will of course give you a very, very good alternative, or a very, very simple starter to a very easygoing dinner service. Now from the show, I will of course thank you once again for joining us this evening. I will of course also remind you that you can be able to air your comments, queries, or any suggestions through our Facebook page, that's BrandPlus TV Kenya. And you can also be able to recap on this and many other beautiful recipes through our YouTube channel, that's BrandPlus TV Kenya. So be sure to follow our Facebook page and like. And if you haven't of course subscribed to our channel, do take opportunity this evening to do just that. From me, Chef Andy, it is of course another very, very big pleasure of course to also mention that I'm also very, very happy to host some guests on the show. As you may have seen from the previous episodes, I of course had some of the guests join us on the show. So you can of course take a chance, maybe today, do send a text in, write to us, tell us what you think about food, maybe what you like about food, or what you'd love to learn in your cooking experience when you're on the show. And you could actually be one of the many that may be lucky to join us on the show, just as the rest of the guests did. But for me, it is of course a very, very warm thank you once again. And until the next episode of Dinner Guide, do have a blessed evening and see you soon.